Yellow is one of those colors that just looks amazing on the tabletop and for display models, and over the years I've painted a bunch of yellow Space Marines for commissions for the Imperial Fist chapter. And in this video tutorial I'm going to show you exactly how I painted their yellow armour. Thanks so much for checking out another Fenrir Miniatures tutorial. This one today we're going to be tackling an Assault Intercessor. So the first thing we've got to talk about is the primer, and I would definitely recommend starting with a light color here. I've gone with gray, which I typically do these days. A white or wraithbone would probably work just as well. So to begin with, we're going to be covering the whole model with Averland Sunset, and really you could actually use the spray can for this stage and skip the priming step. So regardless of whether you're using an airbrush or if you're applying it by hand with a brush, the goal here is to really aim for thin coats and just build them up successively so that you're getting a nice smooth and even base coat and you're not going to lose any of that detail on the model. Now that you've got a nice smooth and even base coat, we're going to actually start applying some soft shading. You could definitely do this by hand, but I've actually used the airbrush for this, and basically what I'm doing is making up a bit of a warm tone mix with Snakebite Leather, Gore-grunta Fur, and mixing in some contrast medium. The ratios for this are on the screen, but I did add a couple of drops of water just to thin it out a bit more because it was a bit too thick. The goal here is to lightly spray in the recessed areas, basically as if you were applying a soft shade by hand, aiming to sort of push it into those recessed areas and create a bit of a soft shadow. If you're using an airbrush, I would recommend using a low PSI, something around 20 to 25. I wouldn't go any higher than that, so that you don't get any overspray or any of that sort of spidering if you're spraying it at too high a pressure, because this exercise is kind of more targeted airbrushing. As I said, you could do this by hand if you were just using a normal brush and you didn't have your own airbrush. You would just basically be aiming to lightly glaze this onto the lower parts of the model and just kind of building it up slowly. If you're not a fan of Imperial Fists, then you probably could use this for, say, Lamenters or for the yellow parts of the Howling Griffin scheme. It's quite a versatile yellow, so go ahead and use it for whatever you want. For the basic shading down, we're now going to start highlighting a bit. So we're going to do a bit of layering with Flash Gitz Yellow and aim to spray it from above and kind of from the sides. And basically just trying to avoid spraying it from too low an angle. We're kind of going for a bit of a realistic volumetric kind of highlighting approach to this. Again, go with a slightly low PSI if you're using an airbrush. Around 25 PSI would work, just to avoid any overspraying, as again we're kind of doing a bit more of a targeted airbrushing rather than just, you know, spraying it over the whole model. So a bit more finesse is needed, so we're dropping the PSI a bit just to have a bit more control. So with the volumetric approach to highlighting, what we're aiming to do is kind of emphasize the shapes on the model. So the shoulder pads, if you look at those, they're more of a spherical shape. So you're aiming for round highlights, as that would naturally appear on a more spherical kind of shape. And then the legs and the arms and parts like that are going to have a line across them to kind of emphasize that cylindrical shape. And again, you don't need an airbrush for this. You could do some targeted dry brushing, building that up slowly to get a nice blend, and that could work just as well. For the next stage, what we're going to do is apply what's called a filter. Transparent Yellow by Vallejo is applied over the whole model, and I thin this down around 1 part of the transparent yellow to 5 parts water. And what this does is it sort of helps to unify the hue of the shades on the model and increases saturation. And basically what that means is it makes it more punchy and vibrant. I applied this in 1 to 2 thin coats with my airbrush. You could do that by hand. And if you wanted to make it even more vibrant and sort of a deeper yellow, you could apply more layers. If you'd like to know how I painted the rest of this model, please follow the link down below, which will lead you to a download for the recipe cards showing the step-by-steps through all of those aspects. Once that filter is dry, which shouldn't take too long, what we're going to do now is apply a gloss varnish. And this is to get ready for us to apply an oil pin wash. We want to create a nice smooth surface on the model to protect the paint, but also to help break the surface tension. So you could keep the airbrush out for this stage, or you can actually get your hands on a rattle can version. This one from Vallejo, an acrylic gloss varnish. Do the trick. So just apply it in thin coats and definitely don't go too thick because it could clog up that detail. And just work your way around the model, try and get into all those nooks and crannies. And then once you've applied a nice coat of that, what we're going to do is allow that to dry for a couple of hours or even overnight. If you're in a more of a warm, dry climate in Australia or somewhere similar, then it's going to dry a bit quicker maybe. And you could probably speed it up by using a hairdryer as well. I also apply any transfers at this point as they'll need to go over a gloss varnish surface. So once that varnish is fully cured, the model is ready for the oil pin wash. What I'm doing here is I'm creating a color that is quite similar to Gore-grunta Fur from GW. So you could actually use that if you wanted, and I'd probably just thin it out a little bit. I'm mixing 3 parts burnt sienna with 1 part burnt umber, and then thinning that out to a consistency that's probably similar to a shade, maybe between a shade and a contrast. So I'm just using an old brush here, and you can see I can just touch that onto the recesses and it sort of flows in using that capillary action with the help of the gloss varnish. And just work my way around the whole model, just applying that into all of the recesses. And as you can see, this speeds up the recess shading process so much. I think it's probably one of the most tedious and time-consuming aspects of painting Space Marines and other models. So this just makes it so much speedier, and it's something that I almost always do for army painting projects, especially for commissions, because I just don't have time to do it by hand the traditional way. So as it is an oil paint, we're going to allow that to dry for a couple of hours. Again, if you're in a bit more of a warm and dry climate, it might dry a little bit quicker, and you could always probably use a hairdryer to speed that up a bit, but I think it probably would still take a while, so you might get a bit bored of doing that. Sometimes it can tend to sort of bleed out a little bit, so what we're going to do is come back in with a clean brush and just dampen it with a bit of the thinner and gently clean off any of that excess. So we're still left with a model that has a bit of a glossy effect on it, which isn't really ideal. So what we're going to do next is come in and knock back that glossiness using a satin varnish. So you could use pre-mixed ones. I've never really found one that I was happy with, so I just mixed my own. So it's about 3 parts ultra matte to 1 part glossy, and these are both from AK Interactive. And same as with the gloss varnish, we're just applying this in thin coats and just working your way around the whole model. You'll kind of notice if you haven't hit some parts because they'll still have a bit of a glossy sheen to them, so just make sure you get it into all of those gaps. I should also point out that you could probably find a rattle can version of a satin varnish. Vallejo probably has one if you're not going to be using an airbrush. Alright, now we can switch over to a normal brush and start doing some edge highlighting. We're starting off with Phalanx Yellow and just working around and applying that to all of the edges. The brush that I'm using is a Rosemary & Co Series 99 size 1, which is my workhorse brush, which I get a lot of work done with it. If you'd like to grab your own one of these brushes, please follow my affiliate link down below in the description. I get a small commission from any purchases made through that link, and it's just a nice way to help out the channel and help me to be able to keep doing what I'm doing. If you make any mistakes with the highlighting, don't stress. You can always turn them into chipping spots later on, which is what I usually do. Or just go over with some Averland Sunset, maybe mixed with a bit of that transparent yellow to give it a bit more of a vibrant look and be a bit of a closer color match to the base coat. And it is worth pointing out that I actually do intentionally apply some scratches and chips at this stage, just to create a little bit of a battle damaged effect. Some secondary highlights are applied with Dorn Yellow. As this is quite a bright yellow, we're just applying this much more sparingly and really just trying to create some nice sharpness to the edges. And you should hopefully end up with something like this. I'm really glad that I finally got around to doing this tutorial. Quite a few people have asked me how I go about painting my Imperial fists. So if you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And again, if you're wanting to know how I painted the rest of the model, please remember to check out my recipe cards available over on my website. You'll find the link in the description below. It's a completely free download, and if you have any feedback to offer on those, I will be very happy to hear it. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram in my DMs. The link to that will be in the description below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!